take home the golden gloves, you've got to put in the work, and you've got to be tough as nails. Ashley Kalis was driven to achieve. Today, Kalis is still fueled by that same hope, grit, and determination. A mother of 3 school-aged boys and successful business owner who ran testing and vaccination sites across the state. Kalis is the fighter Rhode Island needs right now because it's time for a change. Ashley Kalis for governor.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the show, my name is Irina Zuckerman. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Dr. Najat AlSaeed. She is the adjunct professor at the American University in the Emirates, and she's also media affairs and academic director at Sharaka, an NGO. And the subject today is actually the book that she just published in late March. The subject of the book is Twitter diplomacy and media polarization before and after the Abraham Accords. It touches on a lot of different issues. On the U.S. Relations with some of the Gulf states, on information warfare, on techniques of PR and social media and relationship building between and public diplomacy. We are going to get into all of that, but I'd like to start with Najat by asking her. This book has been years in the making, and I was very fortunate to be involved at the early stages of its inception. Why do you think this subject, this very relevant subject for all involved, for Americans who want to understand how Gulf states express and communicate themselves and lobby, and of course for the Gulf states themselves, why did it take so long to finally reach the audiences?
Reach which audiences you mean, and what way?
In English, and finally be published. What's the story behind the book?
Okay, the story behind the book mainly is that polarization and attacks mainly that are happening against Arab Gulf countries and specifically UAE and Saudi Arabia. The fact that that was something very important for the author, because it's not only because the author is from the Gulf, it's because it's more than that, in fact, because as we know that the region, the Middle East region mainly, is divided, or the MENA region, let's say, is divided into 2 axes, the axis of moderation and the axis of resistance. And the axis of moderation includes Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, and Jordan, and of course, Morocco. And the axis of resistance includes the Iranian regime and its allies, including like Iraq, Iran, and the other ideological parties like the Muslim Brotherhood and other political Islamists. So what is happening when we see like day and night attack on the main two countries of the axis of moderation? Here, you're killing stability, you're killing peace, you're killing tolerance, and at the same time, you're feeding violence and anti-peace, anti-even statehood. So this is a very, very dangerous thing. So in a very dangerous region already, and we know that the Middle East is already an area of turmoil. So here, as if you are giving the green light for those who are against tolerance and against peace, and you are attacking those who are promoting this by different reasons. So that's the main motivation of the book, and that's why it asks the question of the book, whether Twitter diplomacy can combat this kind of polarization. And the book focused mainly on the mainstream media in the US and the UK because of its global impact, more than any other kind of media. Because if we talk about any other media in other language, it will have its impact on this area. Even the book, it just highlighted very briefly on some Arab media, but the focus was on the mainstream media in the US and the UK, because they are both in English, and also those countries have a huge media institutes that have a huge impact globally. So whatever is broadcast or printed in this media, it will have a huge impact in the whole world.
So getting back to the title of the book for a second, you use the word Twitter diplomacy. What is the significance of Twitter as social media in the Gulf states? Why Twitter and not, say, Facebook or Snapchat or anything else? And why have they decided that this is a tool for any sort of outreach whatsoever? Why is it even a question that this is a tool for trying to combat any sort of ideological extremism or attacks on these countries? I mean, it seems to be a phenomenon unique to those states. Can you explain what's behind it?
Okay, actually, the main thing, because there's no actual media that is already established in those countries that can combat a huge impact of the mainstream media in the US and the UK. So what happened? The author chose, which is that I'm talking about myself, but I'm using the third, person and that to make it like more formal in that case. Anyways, so what is the most used tool that will have an impact, at least to partially combat this kind of a huge impact? So that's why the social media. And when you pick up in such study like this, you will be looking for two main things. First of all, what is the most social media that is used politically? Because this is the book is actually covering a political issue. Like if I'm not using something that is dealing only with of youth, that to pick up something like the Snapchat. I'm not using only something for business in order to use the Instagram, because the social media actually is divided based on the topic. So if I were like more talking about social issues, I will be using, for example, Facebook. This is number one. Number two, important issue, actually the use of the different social media platforms depend on the different countries. For example, if I were, for example, picking for my case study, Egypt, I might be more focusing on Facebook because, for example, Egypt and Morocco use more, North Africa in general use more Facebook than Twitter, while the Gulf countries use more Twitter, especially when they talk about political matters. Like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they call Twitter the Saudi parliament. So whenever they want to change anything, like on the ground. They just put a trend of a certain topic and they start to talk about it and it becomes trend, and it actually got changed on the ground. And also the fact that we want to see also the impact of this, whatever is written and the trends that are widespreading on Twitter. You see how the percentage of people that are using Twitter, actually the percentage of people, especially the youth, are using Twitter in the Gulf very highly, and mainly in Saudi Arabia, #1, and immediately comes after it UAE. So here, whatever the diplomats are publishing and posting or tweeting in Twitter, it actually does have an impact, on the people, especially on the youth. So that's the main reason that Twitter was used other than any other social media platform, for these reasons.
Now, here we're going back to the idea of extremism. You mentioned that these states did not have a sufficient media apparatus to counter what was happening in the US and UK media. What's the relationship between the US and UK media and the enemies of these countries, Iran, Muslim Brotherhood, and so forth? Why was there a perception that the media is something that needs to be countered, as opposed to worked with, explained, and just be involved in or quoted in, for instance?
Well, this is very important question, Brandon, very important. Because when you're talking about political communication, definitely it is mingled between media and politics. It's not only media by itself. So whatever we see on the mainstream media is actually driven politically, and whatever is like the polarization that is actually happening on the ground is actually reflected in the media. So what is happening currently, what is known now, obviously, it was before, it was like not that apparent, but now it's even much more, is that alliance between the leftist in the West and the political Islamists. And it is alliance politically, and it is reflected even in the media. So what is happening, for example, let's bring the United States as an example. So we see that the media, especially the mainstream media, is basically dominated by what we call the left, but is actually they are actually called in the US the progressive. Okay, and unfortunately, currently, the moderate Democrats are not anymore dominating as much as the leftists, and this is what is happening actually politically. And the fact that those are dominating the media, so basically we see everything is reflected in the media. So what is happening inside what would they call it, the liberal parties, or in the West in general, and in the US and the Democrat Party is basically dominated by the leftist ideology. What is saying that you can combat the terrorism through through political Islamists. So political Islamists, in their point of view, is the antidote for those killers like ISIS and like Al-Qaeda. Okay, this is what they think, and this is their political ideology, and we see it reflected, unfortunately, in the media. While the conservative parties is saying, no, those political Islamists is the gateway for those extremists and those killers like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So when you give them, they are not moderate. They're actually the ideological platform for those radicals and the killers. So because the ideologies are actually coming from them. So when you collaborate with them, you're giving a gateway for the actual fighters that are representative with those groups. So this is the main differences. The axis of moderation are actually in harmony with the conservative party's point of view. So when I talk about the axis of moderation, that consists of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, and Jordan, they're all aligned mainly with the conservative party's point of view. that those political Islamists are gateway of extremism. So don't tell me that those political Islamists are antidotes for those killers or fighters, because they are actually the school of ideology is coming from them. So what is happening, that's why you see in the mainstream media, whether in the US and the UK, and a lot of people are asking why this kind of media is like basically like attacking Saudi Arabia, attacking UAE, attacking Egypt, but why we don't see that attack against the Iranian regime, against the Muslim Brotherhood, against, for example, the militias in Iraq, in Lebanon, for example. So people are, even in the region, are asking, it's weird for them. It's basically because of this kind of alliance that is reflected in the media. So whatever is running politically, it is reflected in the media. So that's why it is important.
Now, we have seen that up until about 2017, the media, of course, covered the Middle East, but most of the coverage was focused on Iran. It was focused on the Iran deal, the negotiations during the Obama administrations. It was not really, and of course it covered the reactions by the Gulf states to the JCPOA, but did not really pay all that much attention to the internal dynamics. And frankly, the coverage was more focused on promoting the goals of the United States at that time than on these issues. Since approximately 2017, all of a sudden we saw a spike in coverage of Gulf-related matters, and a lot of it was very, very highly contentious, partisan, and quite frankly propagandistic. Why the sudden interest in countries that have had a very long-standing relationship with the United States and had been active in various areas for decades? What happened? Why did the media suddenly get so involved in these issues?
Well, because the media is reflecting whatever is running politically. And what now, especially when the Biden administration came, the first priority for the administration was basically the Iranian deal. That's why you see it reflected in the media. It was #1 issue. So that's the main reason. And we saw the continuous attack on Saudi Arabia. We remembered, even during the presidential campaign of Biden, when he wants to make out of Saudi Arabia a pariah state. And, the continuous attack on Saudi Arabia because of the Khashoggi case over and over again, not taking into consideration that the people who were in charge of it were into court, and they didn't take that. So the main focus was attack on the leadership, not taking even into consideration the long history between Saudi Arabia and the US. It is a long history. So this is what is happening currently, and when you see it, you couldn't attack a historical ally without consequences. The main consequence out of that, you will lose them, or at least they will start to diversify these allies. So what is happening currently? Those countries like Saudi Arabia, like UAE, like Egypt, they're trying to diversify their allies, because unfortunately, the US is not becoming the reliable ally like before. So that's why, who is next? So definitely there's Russia and China. And currently the US is so upset about it. But actually the foreign policy of the US that is reflected continuously in the media is the cause of that. Now, when the Ukraine war happened, okay, they want the siding of the Gulf. They remembered the Gulf now. So you couldn't keep attacking those countries 24/7 in the media, and basically what you're doing, assassinating the character of those leaders by attacking them 24/7. And when you need them, you just tell them, dump those new allies and side with me. No. Foreign policy doesn't work like this. Foreign policy is built on trust. And when the trust is gone, I couldn't just dump my new ally for this kind of zigzag foreign policy. one administration comes that practices certain foreign policy, and then comes another administration that is practicing another, and then and the problem, everything is reflected in the media. All of this polarization politically is reflected in the media. The media has a huge impact on the public, and it's global. It's everywhere. Like you couldn't harm and defame your ally through using the media, and when you need them, you just want them to come and support you. This doesn't work. So the media is basically reflecting and sustaining what is happening politically, and it's creating even the agenda setting of this kind of the political partisan that is happening even in the United States. All of that is reflected in the media, and the problem, I don't want to go deep through the different political media theories, but there's something called the cultivation theory. When you keep repeating and attacking over and over again for years, a certain political leader, a certain idea get engraved in the people's mindset. And unfortunately, I saw that when I visited the US and couple of times the last 2 years, this year and the year before. So whenever I go to universities, whenever I go to institutes, there's a huge bad image on the Gulf, and mainly Saudi Arabia and UAE, because of what is reflected in the media, even in the educational institutes, not only among politicians, of course, even among the younger generation in the United States. Why? Because they are so much influenced by what is presented in the media. So here, like how you can work with an ally if you are harming their reputation 24/7 in the media. This is dangerous. And at the same time, who is taking advantage of that in the United States? And I'm sure, Irena, since you are in the United States, you can see that yourself, how the other part is taking advantage of that. Like the political Islamists, like the Muslim Brotherhood are taking advantage of that, because when they see those axis of moderation countries are attacked, they are going to be using it for their own advantage. Look, they are attacked, and when you attack such countries and leaders the whole time, they get weakened because you are distorting the image. And accordingly, when you are weakening the foe of the axis of resistance that is against peace, tolerance, and against stability, they are empowered, and they're using these attacks for their own advantage. So as if you are empowering violence, empowering terrorism through the attack of the others. So what will I be doing? My duty is already complicated, and now it's even much more complicated of what is going on politically, and definitely what is going on in the media. Because the danger of the media, it goes viral. Maybe when there are political differences, maybe politicians can work things out together, because at the interest that what matters, even regardless of the whole complications. But when you impose all of these negatives in the people's mindset through the media, how come you're going to change their views? So this is the danger. How you can change, for example, the mindset of the American public after you impose Saudi Arabia and that point of view. It's hard, because it took long time to get that to get to them to believe in that, and now it will take, and it will be even harder to change what have been broadcast and published all of these years for the many times over and over again.
The democratic-leaning media has always been more critical of Saudi Arabia and UAE than the conservative media, but really it was only in the last few years they have really started focusing so much on the leaders of those countries. Until then, they simply reported positively or negatively on the political positions, on the issues involved, and so forth. What happened? Why did this strategy change from simply covering what happened in those countries to focusing on these character assassination attempts against the leaders specifically?
Well, the main answer for this, because the Democrat Party is not the Democrat Party that we are used to. The Democrat Party, originally it is actually composed of three parts. The traditional part, which is more lean to the conservative parties, and the moderate one, and that was the norm for many years, the moderate, and now they have the left. So now what is happening? Before in the 80s and the 70s, the moderate were dominating. The moderate in the Democrat Party were actually dominating, and that is the perfect thing. What is happening currently, those who are in the left, and that happened unfortunately during the Obama administration, because until now the far left dominated and hijacked the Democrat Party, and this is actually definitely reflected in the media. So basically, the ideology is of the leftist ideology is basically totally against the traditional even America. And since it's against the traditional America, whether in the norms domestically and including the foreign policy. So basically those leftists are against all the traditional allies of the United States. And since the Arab Gulf countries, mainly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, since they are part of those traditional allies, so that they are against them. So what they want to dump those traditional allies and substitute them with the countries that used to be, or according to them, were used to be the enemies of the United States. So they didn't consider them currently the enemies, like the Iranian regime and their allies. So this is the danger that is happening, especially in the foreign policy. I'm not gonna now deal with the domestic policy here in the United States. Let us, and this is what is happening. So that's why you see like some members in the Democrat Party, especially those who are in the left, like AOC, like Rashid Tlaib, or like Ilhan Omar, attacking Saudi Arabia 24/7, while they are so appeasing the Iranian regime and other Muslim Brotherhood parties. So that because their ideologies are about basically are allied with those that were the enemies of the United States. So that is what is happening. So the only solution is to return back the Democrat Party back to the normal. And honestly, I met wonderful Democrat politicians, but unfortunately, their voices are actually gone. They're not there. Nobody hears them. The loud voices is basically now to the left. So the only part of fixing what has been damaged politically, to return back the Democrat Party back to the norm, back to the moderate part. I'm not here like saying, let us dump the Democrat Party and work with the Republican Party. No, we have to work with both. But honestly, we couldn't work with both under this new kind of Democrat image. So, and unfortunately, since they are dominating, even the ones who used to be moderate, like Biden himself historically, wasn't leftist at all. He was more moderate, a moderate conservative Democrat. But now, because the whole mindset of the party is dominated by the left, he's following this kind of mindset. But he himself, when we go back to him historically, he was never ever leftist. We know him. He's like an old politician, you know. We know how he was thinking. But currently, even those who are moderate are like actually now following this kind of leftist path, or what they call them the progressive path of the Democrat Party. So this is the obstacle. This is the main dilemma that we are facing.
We are seeing that since, there's been some very positive reports coming in from the Gulf. There were various economic, social, and political reforms. There has been the Abraham Accords with Bahrain and UAE. Nevertheless, somehow you're telling me that the image of these countries on campuses is very negative due to these media campaigns. The media has reported on these developments. They certainly reported on the Abraham Accords. Why is it that the character assassination campaigns against the leaders of some of these countries have outweighed these very positive developments?
Okay, again, very important question. Thank you for asking me that. When I went to the delegations of our delegations to the US and met with all the professors and the students over there, I'm just giving you the example of because why I'm focusing on universities, because any change, political change, when it first starts, it starts in universities. Mm-hmm. So that's why the educational institutes is very important. Unfortunately, and this was a big disappointment, the majority is against the Abraham Accord. Even the professors themselves. You know, unfortunately, the same thing that is happening in the media is happening in the educational institute, the dominant of the left. And the left is basically against anything that Trump is doing. So that when you tell them Abraham Accord, automatically what comes to their minds? And not the stability that is going to happen, not the huge peace agreements that happened. Look, for example, the deal that today happened between the UAE and Israel. You know, it is a huge fruitful result of the Abraham Accord. How much we see it covered in the US media? I don't think so that much. How much they will be talking about it? I don't think that much. So accordingly, because the Abraham Accord was signed during the Trump administration, we see a lot of professors and students are against it because they think that it is coming from Trump. So that's why we have to refuse it. This is number one. Number two, you know, those are, you know, who are against it, they're trying to justify it, not only because it is Trump, when we trying to actually, you know, say that this kind of cause is quite ridiculous. You're just refusing it because of Trump. They're saying, oh, you're dumping the Palestinian cause. Well, you know, so our answer to them, you know, you couldn't keep doing the same thing for more than 70 years and you could expect a different results. You have been trying this formula of no normalization without solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict for more than 70 years. Did it work out? No. So now we are doing another formula, which is basically normalization and diplomatic relations that will lead to the solving of the conflict. So basically, it is like a new model. And instead of adopting it, you want to take me back to the same formula that hasn't worked out for more than 70 years. So either, you know, you are stuck with this kind of formula, or either you don't want to solve it, because I won't go for the same formula or the same model that hasn't worked out for more than 7 decades. It doesn't make sense. Or give me another kind of solution, but don't use the same thing and you expect this a different result. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. So this is their excuse of doing that. And they even repeated that in many media platforms. I saw that in many newspapers, US newspapers, that, oh, they are like, this is, and why they're doing this kind of peace agreements with countries that never had war with Israel. Why? And they always try to undermine this Abraham Accord. Why? Because it's coming from the Trump administration. And this is another danger. You couldn't show to the whole world, especially when you are a superpower, this kind of polarization and partisan disagreement to the world, you know, because your enemies are going to take this kind of partisan disagreement or conflict or hatred for their own advantage. And that is what actually we hear by the Iranian regime and its allies. Okay, let's wait for this 4 years of Trump and let us just be low profile and calm down, and then we will be activating afterwards. This is so dangerous. This is so dangerous. You know, they reach to the point that let us be quiet now. After this 4 years, they will go and they will change their foreign policy. And then after that, we can move on and go and do whatever we want to do, like empowering our militias, more attacks, on civilians, more attack. And you saw after what happened, after lifting the Houthis out of the terrorist list, what they have done. Attacks on Saudi Arabia, attacks on UAE, and even those parties, the radical parties inside Israel, see the latest attacks, one attack after another, because they can tell that this administration is appeasing to the radicals by all the decisions that have taken from the first time. And I said from the very first day, from day one, I said that those kind of steps are like green lights to the radicals. Go ahead and attack, even if they didn't say it verbally. But actually, when you run after the Iranian regime to make this Iranian deal, and you are running after it, when you take the Houthis out of the terrorist list, and when you appease the Palestinian Authority and give them billions of dollars without any kind of promise of controlling those terrorist groups, this is a green light to the terrorists. Go ahead and attack. So they're making our lives much more difficult. So that is actually what is happening. They are, honestly, Irena, I don't want to be too aggressive in what I'm saying. What I see currently in front of me, an administration that is against the Abraham Accords. It's not pro it. They didn't do one thing, because logically, if they were pro those peace agreements, they could have encouraged other countries in the region to follow the same footsteps of the other countries. But they didn't do that. What they have done, going to the Iranian, after the Iranian regime, to return back the Iranian deal, lifting the Houthis out of the terrorist list, going after Mahmoud Abbas again. So all of this, is taking us back to box number one, which is basically instability and chaos in the region. So that's what is happening. So accordingly, the Abraham Accord, unfortunately, didn't change the image of those leaders who signed these agreements in the media. That's why you didn't see it reflected in the media, because politically, there's no support of it. If there's political support of it, of the elected administration, you will see it reflected in the media. But there's no support of it. Accordingly, the attack is continued. This is the answer to your question.
Now, going back to what you said was the effort to engage in Twitter diplomacy. In your evaluation, did that work? And if not, why not? Why was it insufficient?
Okay, actually, the finding of the study saying it's insufficient. Twitter diplomacy is really good, and I'm not saying it's not workable, but it's not sufficient. Why it's not sufficient? Because of the huge, enormous attack, politically and in the media. So by this huge attack, you need a campaign. Twitter by itself, or Twitter, okay, it's good. Those political leaders are doing good job by clarifying their political views, but because of the attack is driven out of political actually doctrine, it's Twitter diplomacy by itself doesn't work. So you have to have a whole political and media campaign to actually combat this kind of attack. That's why it's not sufficient.
Since 2017, we have seen, first of all, a reflection of the inter-GCC wars in the US media, and of course, attacks by other parties on some of the Gulf countries, by Iranian lobbies, by leftist organizations, Muslim Brotherhood, and so forth. You said that at the point when Saudis, Emiratis, and others have embraced Twitter, the media apparatus was insufficient in those countries. Has anything changed? Has there been an effort to build up media apparatus that would be able to counter the sheer mass of all these propaganda articles and attacks in the US and UK press?
Unfortunately, until now, I don't see anything solid as happening on the ground. Nothing. And even after the Abraham Accord, honestly, there have been many excellent deals. and one of it of the last deal that just happened today. But we don't see. I don't see the deals that is happening in terms of business is aligned with in terms of what is going on in the media. Like, for example, and I mentioned that from the first day of the Abraham Accord, I said, like, this, we have made an excellent step, but this is, let us not forget, this is an area of turmoil. If we don't have a great media alliance, whatever is happening on the ground might be reflected to the public. And that will affect all our deals and the excellent relationship that is happening. So, and that's why I mentioned, like, it is excellent that they have made a deal between the UAE news agency WAM and the Israeli news agency Tazbeet. Okay, this is a great MOU. But actually, what is happening? All the MOU that happened and the agreement that happened, it's basically the coverage of the media during time of stability. So what happened? Okay, so they said, like, we will basically put some news in Hebrew, and the others will put more in Arabic. This is good, but during time of turmoil, like, for example, what happened in Ramadan, the attacks, like for example, after the assassination of this journalist, for example, this is a time when the other part, the anti-peace part, are taking advantage of what is happening and inflaming their propaganda. And accordingly, the people are watching. And you know, when something like this is happening in Jerusalem, which is a very sensitive place to the Muslim world, here they are increasing hatred through what is broadcast in the media. So here, you as countries that have signed the Abraham Accord, what is the counterpart media? I don't see that. The other ones are like spreading this propaganda, and they are inflaming the people. They are like taking advantage of this emotional impact of what is happening, especially in a very critical place to the Muslim world. And the other part, okay, show me your coverage. What is your coverage? I don't see that. So here, we need, like, basically, the Abraham Accord countries have to be exchanging correspondence and have also to be exchanging political analysts. And also, one of the main important things that I mentioned, even in the book, that we want to see even exchanges of anchors. Like, for example, an Emirati anchor going to Israeli news station, an Israeli anchor going to Emirati news station. So when the people see an anchor presenting, and there are many, by the way, who can speak Arabic fluently, I met them there. So here the people are going to be, like, influenced. And the other thing, there have to be correspondent from here going there and covering what is happening on the ground, especially in time of turmoil. Because you don't want to take the video in the half and you just show the public the attack is coming from one part against, without showing the story and the narrative from the very beginning. And unfortunately, the mainstream media in the US and the UK is echoing the propaganda media of the axis of resistance. If you watch them, they're actually echoing the same thing. So why you're not showing the narrative from the very beginning? I don't want to take sides here. I want to show that to be objective and show the truth to the public. Why you're showing only when this side is attacking? They're not crazy. They didn't just attack for the sake of, this part has done something, so they reacted. So why you're showing the video from the half of it, or at the end after the reaction? Show me the action from the very beginning. So, but we don't see that until now.
So last year we had, last May, not this year, but last year we had similar incidents that actually resulted in a war. At the time when Hamas started the attacks, there were Emirati and Bahraini influencers who were active on social media trying to counter the propaganda, but most of it was in English, although there were also some Arabic language information that came belatedly. In a year that transpired between last Ramadan and this year's events that were very similar, although they did not, thankfully, lead to a full-blown escalation. there has been no lessons learned from that, and none of the suggestions that you just made that would have prevented the same chain of events transpired. In fact, things have gotten worse because some of the influencers actually turned and started spreading some of the same propaganda to their followers. And even the statements from the countries were harsher when they were then during the identical events last year. What, in your opinion, is the obstacle to implementing what you said, and why has it not happened in the year when they know already what's going to happen next time?
Well, I didn't know why. I know what's the problem, but I didn't know why they're not doing anything. Everything is going so fast and smooth regarding business deals. But when it comes to two sectors, which are the most influential, the media and the education, it's quite slow. Why? I just don't know why. Maybe because they're worried about the impact of the people. The problem, when it, as I told you, Reina, when it comes to during stability, the social media can cover. But when during the time of turmoil, no, it has to be combined. Social media, traditional media, and political coverage. It has to be all over, because this is very sensitive topic. This is very sensitive area. And, you know, let us not forget the hateful rhetoric that has been for many, many years. It won't go overnight. So that's why you have to be really smart and fast in this time, in these important influential factors, especially the media. So just a couple of influencers in the social media won't be able to cover a huge turmoil that is happening especially what happened in Ramadan, and even after the assassination of this journalist. So you have to have people on the ground, you know, actually broadcasting and telling the truth. Is a couple of social media influencers won't be conveying because they haven't been there. Actually, why we have done this kind of Abraham Accords things? The main thing of making these deals is basically to take people there and to see themselves rather than depending on the media. So the main people who should be going there on the ground are the media people. Those are the first people who should be going, because they should be transferring the reality and putting it over there. Like over the many years, we just know the information through the media. Okay, we have done the Abraham Accord. Now you media people go there and reflect the reality. We want to see the both sides, because we don't want to take sides. And the same thing, we couldn't rely on the current media. So in such a turmoil time, I'm talking mainly about the turmoil time, it's so dangerous. I'm saying even dangerous to depend on social media influencers. That will maybe even make things even worse, because this person who's like tweeting, he hasn't been there. He's basically reading from there and here and tweeting, which is even making things worse. I wish that people never tweet during time of turmoil, because you're not there. You're just listening from here, listening from there, reading this, but this is not enough, especially in this time. So that's the problem. We need exchange of correspondence. We need exchange of journalists during time of turmoil. We need exchange of anchors, exchange of political analysts, and also exchange of political visitors coming during time of turmoil to show us the reality as it is without taking sides. This step hasn't been done until now.
I mean, I'm hoping that after watching this program, maybe some of the agencies will start raising these questions, but it sounds like they definitely need to be raised. They need to be raised with governments. They need to be raised with private agencies. Another issue is really media. It's not state controlled. They do have state channels, but outside of those limited channels, most of it is privately owned, and you have to deal with each one of them independently and figure out the decision-making process. So how to make that work with the Emirati context when there is a lot more deference to the government, and even private agencies generally have, you know, first of all, many of the people who work there are not even Emirati, they're from other countries. So how to make that happen given these cultural differences? I think this is something that should be discussed at conferences, at media events, and should be at the very least start a discussion stage, if not yet an implementation stage, as far as I see, but that brings me back to the question about Saudi and Emirati response to attacks on them. Abraham Accords should have softened the view of the public in Western countries about them. It did not, for the reasons that you've mentioned, and these two countries have not developed sufficient media overall. So to respond to these attacks, so what has been their attempt to respond, at least on political level? Have they developed effective lobbies as at least a political strategy in the absence of influential media? And what strategies have they used to advance their points of views in the US?
Well, until now, I haven't seen this kind of strategy. I see that strategies are going really well in terms of government to government relations. And we can see the reflection and the improvement actually on the ground, and especially sometimes some political conflicts that is happening that are happening globally can bring people together or countries together. So in terms of government to government relationships, I can see the differences. But again, now the impact of the people, because the people have been so much influenced by what is in the media, and the media hasn't been changed. So accordingly, I saw that difference quite a bit on the government relations, but I didn't see any kind of reflections on the people. So when we talk to people, to students, and we talk to professors, still the negative image related to those countries still do exist. The negative, it does exist, this negative image. I didn't see any kind of change, because in order to change the views of the people, there are two things that you have to focus on: the media and the academia. And I don't see that much impact of those two factors by these countries and those two main factors in the US. We really see. And the other thing, you know, the countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE do not have a grassroots existence in the United States. And in order to change this, you know, point of view of the people, you need to have grassroots community. This grassroots community, both countries do not have it. And beside this, we don't have immigrants, like, for example, American Saudis or American Emiratis who live and actually immigrants in the US that will have an impact on the community. Compared, for example, there are many American Iranians in the US, and not all of them, by the way, anti-regime. The ones that were before the first immigrants were anti-regime, but now there are more and more immigrants who are like, even they look liberal and they look open, and I can see them integrated in the American society through the academia, through different institutes. So there are, and even through think tanks. So there are a lot of, for example, and they do have an impact on the American public, while the Saudis and the Emiratis do not have this grassroots impact. And unfortunately, the Arab American community in the US is totally against those two countries, whom we expect to be siding with Saudi Arabia and UAE. American Lebanese or American Palestinians? No, of course not. They won't be. So this is what is missing. In order to have a positive impact on the public, you must have grassroots existence, and they don't have it. That's the main problem. Besides what the people see in the media, that's even adding even more.
Iraq is UAE is a small country population-wise, but Saudi Arabia has approximately 250,000 dual nationals who have Saudi and US citizenship. Why aren't they making more of why aren't they having more of a grassroots impact? Let's say they're, maybe they're not as big as the Iranian American community, but still it's a significant number. Why do we not see them being more active in those spheres? What happens to them when they live in the US?
Well, they are not immigrants. Saudis do not like to immigrate to the US, even if they spend many, many, many years in the US, they like to go back to their countries, while the Iranians, because of their situation internally, they immigrate. Just only in Los Angeles by itself, there are like 500,000 Iranian over there. They call it Tehran Angeles. You will never see something like this, by Saudis. The Saudis, like they finish their degrees, they want to go back home. And the same thing, the Emiratis, besides their like small population. So that's the main difference. However, I think that the Saudis should be making use of the many students who are there. They should be trained, and they should be having an impact, because there are thousands and thousands of Saudi students who are in the US, and they can play a role more than just getting a degree. Maybe the Saudis do not want to confuse their own students by political matters, but I believe since they don't have that many immigrants that will have an impact on the grassroots Americans, so they must honestly take advantage of at least their students. This is number one. The other thing, I believe those two countries must also take advantage or invest, in other words, in their expats. Like those expats, like the Westerners and the Americans who are living in the US or living in the UAE or living in Saudi Arabia, they can be a good diplomat for their own country and can transfer the image of Saudi Arabia and UAE to their country. It makes a big difference than when the ambassador of the US talks about this, the Saudis, or the ambassador of the US and UAE talks about UAE. It's like different when the people, when it is people to people connection. So this is another thing that those two countries have to work on, I believe. And in terms of Saudi Arabia, definitely they have to invest in their students, because there are many, many students. And unfortunately, because they're leaving those students to certain groups, some of them are exploited by professors who are in the left, or by some political parties. So they have to really watch their students and to train them to be a good ambassadors for their countries and reflect the true image. That's what I believe in. This is the minimum thing that could be done.
I know for a fact, actually, that a few years ago during the Gulf crisis, and when there was this big splash of propaganda in the US and following the Khashoggi coverage, the Saudi students were actually strongly discouraged from engaging on political issues with their classmates. And I don't know whether that directive was ever lifted or what happened, but clearly they definitely were not being trained, at the very least, to engage in such encounters. Whoever did engage did so in entirely private capacity and without necessarily any formal training or comprehension of the issues. And frankly, from my view of a lot of the Saudi students, many of them don't engage in political issues or even really interact all that much.
Let me here pop in, Irena, about this. After that many conflicts that happened and misunderstanding or miscommunication that happened between the US and the Saudis, I believe that the traditional diplomacy, and they even mentioned that in the book, they must empower and establish big time what is called citizen diplomacy. Citizen diplomacy hasn't been really established that big time in Saudi Arabia and even in the UAE, because it's something that they haven't really needed all of these past years. Because it worked really perfectly the past years just by using the traditional diplomacy. Now, and even when they use their students, for example, they use them, for example, scientific programs, cultural programs, but when it comes to politics, both countries are reluctant to that. Well, I don't blame them, especially in a sensitive topic like Jamal Khashoggi's case, but they have to be trained. Because, like, for example, when I searched of what happened in the Department of State after the September 11, and the United States recognized the bad image of the United States globally. So what has been established, something called the Citizen Diplomacy Center. So what they have done, they trained a public, general public, call it professors, tourists, students, even athletes. They train them in order to promote the country to the general public of the world. It makes a huge difference than when the ambassador or a diplomat talk about his or her country. When the general public talks about it, and then it becomes people-to-people relations. Before the September 11, the foreign policy of the United States do not depend that much on the people. But actually, people even do not know where's the Middle East at that time. I was living in the States at that time. But after the September 11, people are eager. So you must, in order to create a foreign policy change or an impact on the people, you have to target the public, and not only the political leaders or the diplomats anymore. So that's a huge change that happened after the September 11. So these countries are used by only the traditional diplomacy, which is basically political to political, or leaders, or government to government relations. Now the whole situation in the US is totally different. If you want to make an impact and change, you must have an impact on the public. In order to make this grassroots impact, you have to activate and empower citizen diplomacy. This has to be actually established by the foreign ministries of these countries, and train younger adults, or even any general citizen, ordinary citizen, in different fields. Like those professors, when they go to universities, they target those. The athletes, when they go to sports, the students, when they on certain occasions in the universities, even businessmen can, when they make the business deals, they can also talk to the public. So, it has to be a whole holistic, campaign, and they have to be trained, especially when they're going to be discussing political matters. Because if they're not trained, it's not basically what are going to be dictating what those people are going to be saying, but because political matters are very sensitive. And when those citizen diplomats do not know what's going on, they can make things even worse. So they have to know exactly how to deal with people when they are attacked. So when you are attacked, you don't go ahead and attack. You have to be diplomatic. People, the general public have to be trained about that, and they have to say the truth, not only to make it a propaganda. So the other part, how to make it persuasive to the other part. So that needs quite a training, and that's what truly needs to be established.
One of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 initiatives actually seems to cover precisely what you're describing through its initiatives to engage on cultural and other engagements.
Yeah, but it is cultural and science more than
does not
political.
cover the political, correct? But
Exactly.
Here's the thing, leaving aside your specific suggestion for a second, even those purely people-to-people cultural and scientific engagements are not being pursued at the moment. We are seeing political tensions between the US and Saudi Arabia, but universities and average, voters have nothing to do with with the White House or its political course. A third of the country did not vote at all in the last presidential election, and even those who did often did so because they were, they only had two candidates to choose from, but not because they necessarily agreed with whatever each of them was doing on every issue. So there is definitely a lot of room for engagement, but we are seeing, as the political tensions increased, Saudi Arabia and UAE, both of them have actually moved away from direct engagement with the people, even more so than previously, and we've seen less of these efforts to engage with the public, which seems to be actually the only real way to break through this current situation, unless we want to be repeating the cycle every 4 to 8 years with the change of administrations and increased polarization. There should be, relations with our countries should not be a partisan issue, and it certainly should not be dependent on who is in the White House and what course of action is being pursued politically. You can have good people-to-people relations, even during times of political turmoil. So what is it about UAE and Saudi Arabia that's stopping them from pursuing these people-to-people engagements precisely in response to the political tensions?
Well, I believe eventually it will happen, but it will take time in order to do that, because usually, the people in the Gulf are less involved politically. If you compare the people of the Gulf compared to other Arab countries, they don't even talk politics that much. Maybe the recent situations that happened, I believe me, if Iran wasn't inside the region and very close to the Gulf, there will never people, because the mindset of the general public in the Arab Gulf countries, the people, I'm talking about the people, more business oriented. So they're not involved even politically. Even I can tell that from my students, and even in the UAE is even more than Saudi Arabia. My students, I teach media, which is, they call it the fourth power. It's so much political. My students do not like to talk about politics. They don't like it. It's not like, people are or they are afraid, or they're like somebody is forcing them. No, they are so much into the business. So that's why most of them are majoring PR and marketing. Even in the media, they are into the business part of the media. So this is the nature of the people. That's why I'm saying, if we want to train citizen diplomats of how to address the American public, especially in complicated political matters, they have to be trained. The Saudis can do that more because of the bigger population, and they have already students. So at least, those who are, for example, they can take students who are in the political science, for example. Some students, when they do their internship, they do it in the Saudi embassy, for example. They can train that. But again, it has been a norm in the Arab Gulf not to include the people with all these political conflicts, because they consider that as part of the stability of their countries, and the stability and the mindset of their students. They want their students to have a peace of mind, to focus on their studies, and to go and graduate on time, not to give them hard time, and go ahead. And they are also worried about their students. They're afraid maybe there will be conflict during the meeting. Some people will be yelling, some not only from Americans, maybe from other Arabs who are against them. So this is a headache. Let us not do it. But eventually, it has to be done. Maybe it will be good if they do it in a smaller scale, and then they can enlarge it just to see how it works. Because the partisan division now in the United States is so big. It's not only among Americans, it's even among other nationalities, and we see that even in the university campuses, and they have to be trained how to face and address those political matters among those people who are coming only to attack. So this needs a lot of training. So I believe the Citizen Diplomacy Center being established in the foreign ministries of those countries are so important. So it couldn't just go haphazard, like thinking like this. It has to be something that's designed and established by the foreign ministries in order to train the general public of addressing the general public in the United States in such sensitive political matters, mainly.
But considering that the traditional diplomacy has not been so far very successful, who should be training these students and other citizens in doing that? Where should they be getting the experts to give them skills, especially since there seems to be a lack of understanding of the American political processes and culture?
Yeah, they might eventually do it, but I don't know if they're going to be doing it or not. That's why, I mention it in the book. I read very few books about talking about citizen diplomats. Mm-hmm. It's something quite new. Well, we couldn't say that traditional diplomacy is unsuccessful. It has been successful, but now because of the challenges even much more than before, they need something extra. Part of it, one part of it is citizen diplomacy. So I believe if in order, we need more expertise to talk about the advantage of citizen diplomacy. Actually, the Twitter diplomacy, you can consider it, even though it is part of digital diplomacy, but it could be also a part of citizen diplomacy. And the fact that political leaders and diplomats were engaging in social media is basically to get closer to the people. So the same thing that has been done by them in the social media, why we don't create at least citizen diplomacy between people and people? Let's start it even through the social media. But again, those people have to be trained, because otherwise it can go even worse. So this is even another good start. Instead of just starting physically in universities, for example, or any other public places, it could start by using the social media platforms. Like, for example, in Twitter, there's also in Twitter, as you see, there's something called the space where they can talk. So like a room can be created by, for example, Saudis, Emiratis, and Americans, younger adults discussing certain matters to clarify it to the American younger adults. That can be a start, something like this. So, but it has to be planned.
But here's the thing, we have seen in the past that even Western consultants who were hired by these countries to handle political crisis and communicate to the Western public the point of view of these governments and the countries in a way, they failed. They did not do their jobs. We have seen that they were not invested enough to really propagate. Many of them left as soon as they saw controversy because they didn't want their own reputations to be damaged by scandals. How do we get the professionals who can actually provide the skills to handle crisis, to handle tense situations, and not just general communications about the status? The precise same thing that you mentioned about the media, the exchange of journalists and anchors who can cover. How do you provide the sort of that's actually the easier part, because once you get past through those obstacles, the process itself is clear cut, what you just suggested. But finding people who can actually both understand what the West is looking for and understand the mentality of those states in order to provide the perspectives to their counterparts in the US and Europe, how do you find them enough professionals who have not already failed in the past to train these citizens? Who is going to be doing this teaching, given that there's a large cultural gap, it seems to me?
Well, I put it as part of the recommendations. There's a huge need of training both Saudis and Emiratis in citizen diplomacy, and also as professionals. We need professionals basically to be able to write for both the right and the left media. We don't have that. Look, whoever is writing is they're not Saudis. And let us be realistic. Unfortunately, the majority who is dominating the media in the Gulf are not the nationals, and this is very dangerous. There are mainly Arabs from other countries. Those are coming with their own package of ideologies, and these ideologies are totally different than the pragmatism politics of the Arab Gulf countries. So that's why some of them are even reluctant to show, for example, their satisfaction or their encouragement of the peace agreements that happened lately. Some of them are even not pro the access of moderation themselves, because they're coming from a different background. So we will never reach to reaching to the American public without training the nationals. the national Saudis and the national Emiratis. And they have to be fluent in English, and they have to be good writers, and they have to target, this group will be targeting the conservative, this group will be targeting the liberal, this is the moderate. They have to be all over, because the United States is a huge country, is a country of institutes. There's the right, there's the left, there's the middle. We couldn't just focus on one. So they have to be trained. So we have to train professionals, and they're not there, unfortunately. How many Saudis are writing in American newspapers?
No.
How many Saudis are on the news in the US? How many Saudis are political analysts in American news stations? How many Emiratis are writing in the US? We don't see them. We don't see, they're not there. This is dangerous. And they have to train their nationals in order to write in the American newspapers, at least as an op-ed writer. This doesn't exist. Also, they have to be trained researchers in the US and the UK. We don't see that. So we couldn't depend on other Arab countries to do our work, because they are coming from different mindsets, which is not aligned with the political path of these countries. And this is even against our national security, not only against our interests. I'm talking about national security. So that's what should be done. So we have to have two kinds of training professionals and training the citizen diplomats who can talk just publicly, but also they have to have the knowledge and they have to be trained. And we don't have that. It doesn't exist until now.
So we have seen that this social media outrage, first of all, it targeted social media influencers, so-called blue check and so forth. But a lot of the regular people, a lot of the regular Americans, first of all, are not even on Twitter. Actually, there is a relatively small percentage of Americans who are on Twitter. Most of them are the journalists and the politicians and so forth, but those journalists don't necessarily respond to foreigners necessarily, or to even all comments that they get, precisely because they're busy, or if they're politicians, it's usually their staffer who handles the account and not they themselves. So now that we're seeing that this Twitter diplomacy has its limits, that it's most effective for internal use, least effective when engaging with a country that has a completely different approach.
With less conflicts, Twitter diplomacy can be sufficient when there is like less misunderstanding, less miscommunication, but when it is enormous, it won't be sufficient.
How do we start bridging that gap? How do we go from your recommendations in the book that's in English to having the Gulf states actually adapt at least some elements of it as part of a political strategy? And on the other hand, in the US and the West, how do we develop a response, that's aimed at this issue? Right now, just going to the academia, a lot of the academic articles related to Gulf states and these PR issues, they usually written by Muslim Brotherhood activists and leftists, and and mostly people who don't really, most Americans don't have the base of knowledge about the Gulf states to even engage in this topic. So we have a very biased and very limited access to basic academic information to inform the discourse on the one hand. On the other hand, you have a proliferation of different journalistic outlets, so many that you can't keep up with them, but really there is no, they seem to quote the same people all the time, and usually, it's a couple of usually nameless officials in those countries, or, heads of think tanks in the West that are basically either Westerners themselves, or again, are not necessarily reflective of those countries in culture. So how do you integrate, how do you engage the Americans, the British and whatever? How do you give them opportunity to understand the culture, to meet people? How do you encourage them to engage more? on their side? Where do they even begin? Because I don't see a lot of conferences that include these guys a lot of the time, and there's certainly no follow-up or formal engagement.
The country that needs that should be initiated. Okay, so here, this is the question: who wants to show the true image? Is it the British or the American, or is it the Saudis and the Emiratis? Okay, who cares about the image of their countries to certain public should be the initiator.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Saudis and the Emiratis do care about their images and or let us say to show that reality to the American public, they should be actually initiating what is happening. In order to initiate what is happening, there should be a whole campaign of doing it. There are two levels: the governmental level, and they're doing that fine. I'm not going to talk about this. And then this new approach, which is called the people level. The people level has a lot of categories. One of it is what we just mentioned, the citizen diplomacy. The other thing, training professionals. The third thing, you have to talk the language of the people. How can I convey my message to the people? Through which channels? Is it through the social media alone? Or is it through the broadcast or the traditional media? And it has to be in English. I couldn't speak Arabic and tweeting 100 times of Arabic, and I expect that Americans will understand what I'm talking about. I must do it in their language because I want to convey my message to them. How many trained Saudis, whether professionals or ordinary people, can write fluently in English to convey the true political issue of their country to the American public? How many? There are like quite few. We need more of them. And how many, for example, professionals who can write fluently in English to different media platforms? We need to train more because actually they almost do not exist. Maybe one or two or three, a couple of them. We need to train them. This is another thing. The other thing regarding, we have said hundreds of times, please, we need a news station in English. We need it in English because we couldn't, how the Americans are going to be actually knowing what our political views. Okay, they're saying that usually Americans, when they watch news, they don't watch the Arabic channels in English. Okay, but look, from my point of view and from my experience, most of my professors who taught me in my PhD, whenever they want to know any issue related to the Middle East, where do they go? They don't go to the CNN, they don't go to the BBC, they go and turn Al Jazeera English. Mm-hmm. So don't tell me that Al Jazeera English is a failure. No, it is truly not widespread among the whole public, because maybe not everybody is interested in the Middle East. They go and watch their own local channels because but whoever, all the professors and the researchers that I met when I was doing my PhD in London, all of them, because this is their major, all of them watch Al Jazeera English. And not only that, they depend on this information on Al Jazeera English they depend their researches upon it, and they make whole studies upon it. So and we know Al Jazeera English is not that pro Saudis or Emiratis. So that's another thing what has been done. Another thing that they should be doing, because we always say that the Muslim Brotherhood and other political Islamists, they show their moderate face in Arabic, and their moderate face in English, and their radical face in English. Okay, fine. If you don't have the budget to create a huge news station in English, at least make a channel, like Memory. Memory is doing a great job. When they are subtitling those, do the same thing. Show the double face of this political Islamists, what they're saying in English and what they're actually saying in Arabic, because Americans and British couldn't understand Arabic. At least it translates what they're doing. So these are the type of things that we should be showing to the American and the British or whoever non-Arab speakers. Are they doing that? No. So these are the steps that should be taken. Something like this, and there are many other programs, but you have to do it, because unfortunately the other part, they're doing a lot. Those for example, what I call the axis of resistance, including the Muslim Brotherhood, the Iranian regime, are doing. They do have their own stations in English and Arabic, and they have their own people in the West. Look at the huge impact of the Muslim Brotherhood on the Western society. They even infiltrated the media institute, the research institutes, definitely the educational and academia. So when your foe is doing a lot, you have at least to combat that, because what they're doing is spreading hatred against those. Believe me, Irena, through my research, all the negatives and all the attacks that are written against UAE and Saudi Arabia are not written by original Americans. They are written by either Palestinian American, or either by Iranian American, or Lebanese American, or Yemeni American, or British. I haven't, very, very few of them are written by actually Native Americans or Native British. So this is dangerous. So accordingly, you must have at least the similar numbers and the other parts writing, and natives, national Saudi, because nobody will write genuinely, defending the countries as much as the nationals themselves, because they're the ones who care, because this is basically their future. So that's what we need to do.
What do you see happening that might show the next step in these engagements? You mentioned the polarization. You mentioned how much the stakes have risen in the recent years. Yet we have seen complete lack of initiative from any of the parties involved. Even the Israelis are not really initiating any such efforts. The most we've heard is I-24 opening an office in Rabat. That's hardly that's something, but it's not. But the founder of I-24 is from Morocco. He's originally, so at least there is this cultural relationship that's ongoing. It's not the case with everyone else. So there is a big cultural gap to fill. So what's next? You've written the book. You're hoping that it will, get discussed. How do you push for recognition of the needs for these ideas? What's your next step on these issues?
Look, to wrap this up, Irena, because this is a huge. I will take the whole day to talk about it. But let me tell you, media is like politics and like foreign policy. As the foreign policy need alliance, you couldn't make any foreign policy successful without making an alliance or without having an allies. The same thing is happening to the media, especially when you want to have a global impact. You will never have a successful media by an individual type of media. So if we want to talk about a successful media that has a global impact, like on the West or globally, it has to be alliance. The Saudis by themselves, they couldn't make it. The Emiratis by themselves couldn't make it. The Israelis by themselves couldn't make it. It has to be a group, an alliance. That's why I called the chapter that I added after the Abraham Accord, the media alliance among the Abraham Accords countries. So, and definitely, you have to collaborate with certain parties or groups that believe in your political path in the US and in the UK and other countries. So it has to have you have to have a media alliance in order to have a global impact. If each country is going to make its own news station and they think that a successful news station by a million worth studio and beautiful presenters, that doesn't, this is not the ingredient of a successful media. It has to, first of all, you have to have an alliance, and it has to have an intellectual backend. And the intellectual backend is through research institute and you have to have in this research institutes, those are the brains who write, and those practitioners who transferred these kind of studies into an actual programs that are reachable and understandable to the general public. And you have to make an audience research to study, and you have to also focus on your target audience. Don't think any kind of successful media will satisfy all the audiences on earth. You must have a specific target audience. You say, those are the audience that I want to have an impact on. And nobody can do this huge impact by itself. Let me end up this. The Qatari media, why it is successful? If the Qataris did that by themselves, they will never be successful. The cause of their success, because they were allied with a lot of groups. Their main alliance, they in the Arabic sector, in the Arabic media section, they were allied with Islamists and with Arab nationalists, because they know those two are their main target audience in the Arab world. And they are so influential because they play with the hearts and minds of the people. So so most of the anchors and even the producers of Al Jazeera Arabic are either Islamists or Arab nationalists or leftists, okay? And they were allied in the English part with the leftists, because there are kind of harmony between the Arab nationalists and Islamists and the leftist West. So they weren't successful. Al Jazeera will never be successful if it was only a Qatari project by itself. The same thing should happen, by the axis of moderation. You couldn't just bring a Lebanese or like a Palestinian or like Moroccan presenter and present for you something that he doesn't even believe in. Look, just compare and contrast between the Al Jazeera presenters and the Al Arabiya presenter. The other ones, they talk from their heart because they are not only presenters, they're actually believing in these kind of agenda of this channel. The others are just reading because they don't believe in it. It's not coming from their minds and their hearts because this is what the government wants, and I'm just saying it. No, the people in this media sector, whether it's broadcast, newspapers, social media, it has to be from the hearts and the minds of the people who are working, whether the people who are in front of the camera or back of the camera. It has to be from here and here, and people can tell. That's why Al Jazeera is so much influential, because the people who are working and believe in what they're saying. The others are just, they're just presenting. They don't believe in what they're saying. So that's why I keep saying 100 times, we need to train our nationals, because they're the one who are truly believing. It's hard to take someone like 40 years old from other Arab country and make them believe in our political agenda or our political path. It's different when someone is actual citizen and do care about that. So you have to train your nationals and they have to be at least bilingual in order to reach to this global impact. That's my main message.
I couldn't agree with you more. I hope that your message gets heard, because there's so much work to do, and what you're telling me is exciting, innovative, important, and likely to have a great deal of impact, but it needs to be done. At the end of the day, it needs to be done, and the Saudis and Emiratis, they need to stop being afraid of sending their people to discuss these issues, to discuss their countries in the US media and channels, and look for somebody else to do that for them. At the end of the day, there's no substitute, there's no legitimacy. I can make comments in all the media in the world, but if I want to have a real discussion, I want somebody from that country.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This was another great discussion. I hope I hope the readers take the time to read your book, the on Twitter diplomacy and media polarization before and after Abraham Accords. It's available now on both Kindle and in soft cover as a hard copy publication, and because we barely started touching on everything that needs to be done to bring the countries closer to overcome these obstacles, to learn. Our enemies are doing the job. They're publishing that. They're constantly having these conversations among themselves and with each other and expanding their networks. We are all divided by themselves. American friends are here, the Saudis over there, Emiratis. We need to have these discussions together, and we need to have a consistent follow-up on these discussions, something that takes us from discussion to the next step, even if it's slow.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to discuss my book and to discuss all of these matters that I think touch everybody who's interested in politics, diplomacy, and media. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, and the best of success with everything.
Thank you.